All right, so what we're doing tonight is we're talking about heaven and earth. And you guys got your questions last week a little bit to, how do you define heaven? How do you define earth? How do you define hell? And it was interesting to see your guys' responses. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because I feel like we have misconceptions about these terms and their themes throughout the Bible. And I know that we have misconceptions, not just because I read your answers, but also because of my own answers. As I've studied, as I've learned more, even in these last couple months, I'm like, oh, my thinking was kind of off, which is kind of scary because I'm supposed to teach you guys. And I'm still learning stuff. I'm so sorry I don't know everything, guys.
And so he called me for backup, and I knew even less. So, it's going to be a fun series, guys. It's going to be real interesting because the teachers are going to learn just as much as you guys.
It's true. So, you may be wondering why we're both up here. We've both taught before, but never together. And one of the reasons why we decided to go this route is because there's going to be a lot of new concepts. There's going to be a lot of questions. Thank you. And there's going to be a lot of new material that makes you think, and you're like, is that true? Is this real? Like, what does the Bible say? These are not the things maybe I've heard as I grew up. And so we want to make this more of a conversation rather than, one of us just coming in and teaching at you guys throughout the whole night. And then you're like, whoa, I don't get it. So we want to make this more conversational of us kind of back and forth and also you guys along with us. And we've never done it like this before. So if it sucks, I'm sorry, guys. You can tell me afterward. You're like, that didn't make any sense. Don't do that ever again. That's fine. You can give me your feedback, or if it's helpful, tell us that too, because we've never done that. So give us a little bit of grace. Is that okay? Okay. Well, let's actually pray before we start. How about maybe because we need help. Father, thank you for tonight. We just pray that you would be with us, that you would give Sam and I just the words, and everyone here just the questions, bring them to our mind. I pray that you would give us some answers and some clarity, and that through that you would just help us to live out the way you want us to live. In Jesus' name, amen. So, real quick, the reason we're doing this series is because of this picture right here. Beautiful drawing. I drew it on Kevin's old whiteboard that's really ugly and smudgy, you can tell. I was going to bring it in here, and then I realized I don't have a whiteboard stand, so I just took a picture of it. So, the problem is that a lot of us, I'm going to have to turn around for this, aren't I? Okay, here's Earth, right? And here's how we think of the story of the Bible, or at least a lot of us do. So Earth was created. Who created Earth? God. Good. Okay, at least you guys got that right. Okay. And then there's me. That's an M. I know, I promise it doesn't look like one, but it's an M.
Are you outside of the world? Is that what's
Well,
going on?
I couldn't draw it inside, so I could have. But anyways, we live on Earth, right? Yes. Okay, good. I live on Mars. And a lot of us think the story of the Bible is God created the Earth, we're on here, and then there's a timeline, we live, goes on, eventually we die at some point, and then eventually further on, God ends the entire Earth, gets rid of the Earth, we're done with it, and now it's all about this time where we go up to heaven, somewhere here in the clouds, wherever, I don't know. Obviously not in our clouds because we've been up there, and I don't think we've discovered heaven. Unless you guys have seen it when you've taken a plane? Anyone? No? Okay. And then the other option, of course, is if you don't go to heaven, you're going down somewhere like beneath the Earth's crust or something, and you somehow get to this place of fire where there's, the devil prodding you with a little pokey stick or something. What a pitchfork, thank you. I don't know. So this is often the story that we think of when we think of the Bible. Do you guys agree with that? Is that kind of our perspective? That was the perspective I've had for a long time growing up in the church. And the problem with that is it's not necessarily all wrong, but there is some problems with that. There's problems of what heaven is and what hell is. There's problems like this story. Who is this story all about? Me, yeah. I mean, it's right there. It's all about me. What happens when I die, about my decision. Did I, say the secret password or whatever so I can get to heaven? Did I do enough good things? Whatever the criteria that you think it is, did I do what I need to do in order to go to heaven and avoid this terrible place called hell? So the reason why we're doing this story is we want to redefine and show you guys the actual theme of the Bible. I'm not going to give you the answer right now, but I want you guys to know that it's not just to teach you guys how to be Bible nerds, okay? It's not like, oh, guys, guess what? I learned what the definition of it is. Haha, I'm so cool, because I know you guys would do that at school, right? You guys talk about biblical definitions at your schools all the time, right? It's like the way to get into the cool in crowd, yeah? Yeah, totally. So the reason we're doing this is that the knowledge and those things of changing our perspective also has huge implications for our life and how we live. So it's not just because we want to sound smart. It's because this has implications for the way we live, interact with God, interact with each other, and the whole world.
And so when we were going over you guys' definitions, I sensed a lot of common themes. There was different wording for each person, but majority of you are saying, heaven, this is where God is, this is where his will is done, and this is where you go if you die, if you're a Christian. Earth, it's kind of messed up, and this is where we are now. We just kind of have to make it work, right? And then hell is pain and suffering for the rest of your life, and that's where you go if you don't believe in God. But it's actually interesting that in the Bible, there's nowhere does it say that when you die, you go immediately to heaven. That's not something that actually happens. You might be thinking, wait, what about the guy who was on the cross next to Jesus, and Jesus was like, oh, today you will be with me in paradise. It's very possible that with the whole translation thing, punctuation wasn't really a thing back then, so it could have been today I'm telling you that one day you will be in paradise with me. So from what we know, what the Bible says, when you die, you're just dead, and then eventually you will go to heaven. Now, earth, when we're talking
about... Quick clarification. So there is a few scriptures that did say we'll be with Jesus, but it doesn't describe what that means.
It doesn't necessarily mean that we're
that's not the focus of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. It's not the focus of do I go one way or not? It's really about how am I going to be with Jesus someday. And so earth, another interesting about earth is that the way that's messed up now was not God's original plan. We weren't supposed to be here on earth separated from God and then one day get to be with him again. Earth's original plan actually was to be where we would get to be with God. And so the story of the Bible...
Spoiler alert.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry. It's just
kidding.
There's no other way to say it. But so eventually, the point is for Earth to one day be a place where God gets to be, because he started here actually. So, and then hell, we're not really going to go into that right now. That's not what the focus of tonight is going to be. It's going to be discussed later in the series. And if you guys have any questions, I know we had you guys submit questions. Those won't be answered tonight necessarily, just because we're waiting to see when they'll fit into the discussion of the night. But if you guys do have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you if we have the time. And if we don't have time to call on you to answer your questions, we do have the question box. So feel free to write out your question, put it in the question box. It's back there
look behind you,
on the soundboard.
Right by the soundboard. See that white box? It's white.
And you can
There's
see it all
pieces
the way
of
back
paper there. You can also write it down in your journal and just tear a piece of paper, okay? Those journals aren't sacred. It's okay. You can rip them. I give you permission.
Yeah. So the other crazy thing about heaven is sometimes heaven doesn't always mean this mystical, magical place that we go to once we get to be with Jesus again. Sometimes heaven means something else.
Yes. So open up your Bibles to Genesis 1. Before we do that, though, I gotta know, what was your favorite definition of heaven that we saw?
I think the best one was the very good place. That was pretty good. I did like that.
I don't remember who wrote it, but
I don't remember that either.
It was heaven, earth, and hell, and it was the good place,
The meh
place,
and the bad.
the bad
It was
place.
really bad. It was pretty clever. I liked
Pretty
it.
funny.
was
All right,
very
so are you guys in Genesis 1? Put your finger on verse 27, and that is where we're going to begin. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, verse 1:1. I forgot to write that down. Verse 1:1, we're going to start at the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, heavens and the earth, when you guys hear that, what do you think of? Just shout it out.
Respond.
Or the sky, okay. Okay. There's a heaven. Okay. The good place and the meh place. All right. So when you guys think of the earth, what do you guys picture in your mind? When I say earth, what comes to your mind? Okay.
Not all at once.
I don't think that's
But
what
we
comes
heard that
to your
one.
mind. Giant sphere.
Heard
So when
rocks and trees and
rocks and trees, mountains,
Dirt.
clouds, a lot. For me, when I hear the word earth, I picture a globe, right? I picture, the little spinny thing, maybe a flattened map, but mostly just this globe that encompasses the entire planet. And back in ancient days when the Bible was written, that was not their view. So when they say heaven and earth, they're not thinking of a globe. They don't know that there's a globe. They don't
even know that there's an entire world, really.
Yeah,
They just
so
know where they're at.
We have a picture. It's going to be kind of hard to see, maybe. It's a little small. I apologize. So this is how the ancient Hebrews would view Earth, and kind of they also put, this is from the Bible Project, the different days in there, so you can kind of see it. And they believed that the land was kind of this disc. So we eventually discovered the Earth wasn't flat, but that's kind of what their thought was. And then next to them, they would see water. They would see the sea. They would run on each side, and they would find water. So their minds back in this day was like, oh, we have a little land. It's surrounded by water on each side. That's the whole earth. That's what they knew as the earth. And they had this kind of weird perception because, they don't have the science that we have right now. They're not dumb. They just don't have the same technology that we have. So they think that there's actually kind of this dome above them, and there's water above them, and that dome is keeping the water out. And so when it rains, it's actually coming through the top of that dome.
Kind of like a snow globe, in a way. You take the snow globe.
Are you
see
done,
the top,
Tracy, or
and
do you
that's the
need
sky.
me? Okay, good. Sorry, I didn't know if you need me. Cool. So this is kind of their ancient view. So when you read that and you read the creation story, you're not thinking God created this whole entire globe. When we get to the story, the earth was without form, was without void. There's some chaos to it. They're in the desert. There's the earth is kind of already set up, but there's this lack of creation and order to things. And the word heavens doesn't refer to this place that you go when you die, okay? So it's not like, I think most of us, when we think of the picture heaven, whether that's from movies or media or whatever, we think of the cloud with pearly gates and everything's golden and God's just chilling there, and that's his place. It's not talking about this other, place beyond us. It's talking about he created the land and he created the skies. So now, let's see. Let's just read a couple verses here in the creation story. I forgot to write them down, so I got to find them real quick. So in verse 7, God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters, and the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, or the skies. You can also check out when he creates the birds in verse 20. It said, and God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So obviously, it's not birds flying around in God's pearly gates somewhere out there, okay? It's talking about the skies above us. So that's one way that we kind of use the word heavens in the scripture. And why don't you talk about the
So,
other way?
but how did this even begin to become a thing where we would call the skies the heavens? Like, why is that a thing? I mean, like, for me personally, when we were going over this, I was just like, how did that even become a mix-up? I mean, there's clearly a difference between where God is and then just looking at the sky.
Is that your question to me?
It is my question to you.
Okay. So I think one of the things is the word skies, back in the old days, they couldn't go around and, they didn't have planes, they didn't have telescopes and ways to get into the clouds. For us, right, how many of you guys have been in the clouds before? Like in a plane or something else? If it's something else, you gotta tell me, because that would be awesome. Hot air balloon? I don't know. But to us, the clouds aren't that mysterious. We can know what's going to happen with the clouds each day. We know when it's going to rain. We can go visit the clouds. We can go even beyond the clouds. But for the ancient Hebrews, they would look up and be like, whoa, I mean, that's way above us. I can't even comprehend what's up there. We can't see into it. We don't know how it works. We don't know how it's controlled. We just see this great giant sky. And the reason why, you guys notice that it says heavens in some of your translations. Some of them don't say heavens. Let me try. I'm trying to find an example. Okay, let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. And it's plural because it's just a way in Hebrew to say it's that great. It's that far above us.
Yeah, and so when we think of the skies and we think of the heavens and trying to think of how those two things relate, the Israelites actually came up with a perfect metaphor for where God lives and the skies themselves, because for them, the skies were so far above them, you can see it, but you don't understand it, and you can't grasp it, you can't ever dream to go up there. Even nowadays, we can go up into the sky, but are really all the way up? No, because there's still more to go, and there's still more to go. And this perfectly describes...
So what does that represent then? I've forgotten.
It perfectly describes how that's like God, where describing where he lives as in the heavens. That means it's so far out of our reach, out of our grasp, we can't even fathom how high above God is above us. That represents his position over us. And so when we're thinking about that, you can think like, man, these skies are so above us. God is even more so above us when it comes to that.
But does he live in the sky?
No, they were just, they didn't think, the Israelites didn't actually think like, oh yeah, God's probably like, you see that cloud right there? It's probably that cloud right there, because it's so much bigger than everything else, right? No, they just thought of it as a metaphor. They didn't think God's actual physical location was in the skies. So that's kind of how that misconception started, is we thought like, oh, well, heavens are in the skies, if they're the same thing, that means that God's in the sky. No, it was just a metaphor used to describe how far above us that God really is. And so we know a little bit more about the heavens now, but let's talk about the earth.
Real quick though, so if he's living, if heaven represents his area, where is God in the creation story, and where is heaven in terms of earth? Like,
so where God is in terms of the heavens is he is above us, creating all of this. Okay, so there is the sense of like there's the skies, and then there's like even more so the stellar of the skies, where that's where all the stars are, right? And then there's God, who is even above all of that.
Okay, but he's not all the way up there.
He's not all the way up there.
In the creation story, where is God?
Well, he's in the midst of it all, isn't he?
Yeah, and with Adam and Eve, he's walking with them in the garden. So essentially, heaven and earth in the beginning are
one
together. Yeah, they're one. So real quick, just so you guys understand this, we're going to do a quick exercise. I want Sawyer and this half. You guys turn to Genesis 7:19, and Teresa to this half turn to Psalm 102:19. And what I want, this is just a quick activity. I want you to determine, there's the two ways to use heaven in the Bible. I want you guys to tell me, is this verse talking about the skies, or is this talking as a metaphor to describe the character of God? Okay, well,
So do you already have an answer?
give him a
That
chance.
was quick, man.
Oh, I gave you
Genesis-
guys Genesis 7:19, I think. Psalm 102:19. Yes. And Psalm 102:19. Yes. 102 Dalmatians 19. Should I ask you a question?
I'm just like, this is not the part that I talked about. I'm not sure what you mean.
All right. Did you guys get there? Okay. So this side is Psalm 102:19. Can you read it first before you tell us your answer? Shh.
It says, "For he looked down from his holy height, from heaven the Lord gazed upon the earth." And I think this talks about like the actual heaven, because it says his holy height, meaning his domain, I think. And when it says he gazed upon the earth, I wouldn't imagine God necessarily floating on a cloud above us, like the heavens. I'd imagine since it says his holy height, that it is describing this verse.
And that's right. That verse is describing where God's presence would be rather than just the physical skies.
Well, I think it's describing his character as well as like
Yeah, that as well.
he is above, he's looking down, he's at the holy heights. Yeah. Are you answering the question here? Okay, Genesis 7:19. Can you read it and then tell us?
The waters prevailed exceeding upon the earth, all the high hills that were in the whole heaven were covered. In this verse, I think that heaven is used as a descriptor for the sky as a cloud.
Yeah. Cool. Good. Awesome. Nailed it. So, when you're reading the word heavens in the Bible, keep those two things in mind. Is this describing God's character? Is it describing the skies? What is it trying to say here? So, let's move on to the stories, pick up a little bit of pace here. Does that make sense, though? Is there any questions before I move on? Okay, that makes sense. Okay, good. So, now I want you to go back to Genesis 1. We're going to read verse 27 and 28. So now we're talking about what? Yeah. We're going to talk about the creation of Eden and the creation of man. So it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So, here God, we kind of skipped over a lot. We skipped over the creation of all the other days here, but essentially he's made the earth, and now he makes people. So, I don't know about you guys. What comes to your mind in the Garden of Eden? Yeah, just say it. Lot of big leaves. Yeah. Big leaves. What? Perfection. So, is that another one? Go for it. What were you saying?
I just think like succulents.
Succulents. Why? Okay. So, when we're talking about the Garden of Eden, you guys said it, it's this huge garden with lots of trees, lots of life. It's not your mom's backyard with her little gardening tools, okay? How do I know? I mean, there's a lot of animals in it, so I don't think a lot of animals would fit in your mom's backyard, I don't think. So, as you guys said, we thought of it kind of as perfection. We thought of it, or at least I thought of it was like, this great, beautiful garden, But I also had this kind of misconception that, oh yeah, it's this perfection, and perfection to me means chilling out, playing video games, eating some donuts while not getting fat somehow, and just chilling. Like, there's no point to life. It's just kind of enjoying stuff. There's Netflix with every show you want. They didn't take off all the Fox shows anymore. You know, it was just, I almost just kind of pictured it as like this lazy thing. I don't know what you
for me
thought, but-
personally, you know, when I was thinking back when I was a smaller child, I'm still small, so a smaller child, I was thinking to myself, I'm just like, man, this place is gonna be awesome. You just eat fruit all day, and you're chilling with God, and you're talking with God, and you're just like, hey God, what's your favorite fruit? My favorite fruit's this, and that's all you ever do, right? You just talk about fruit, you know. But
all
that's
about the
not
fruit.
that's not what that's about, really,
And
at all.
fruit of the loom.
I mean, it is, but I don't think they wore underwear back then because they were naked, right? So.
All right. Don't know how that fit in, but
I mean,
it's
you
fine.
said fruit of the loom. It's
well,
underpants, right?
I mean, he did tell them to be fruitful and multiply. That's, I mean, just saying. So, this is a good picture of the garden. What you guys said is all right. But there's also this other idea in the Bible that doesn't get talked about, and it's this idea that the Garden of Eden is an image of God's temple. So in ancient times, there's temples, and I don't remember if I put a picture of one. Maybe not. Probably not. I thought maybe it didn't. I don't know.
There it is. There you go. No, that's just
not
kidding.
a temple.
That's not it.
That's
That is the
something
tower.
else.
We'll get into
All right.
that later.
So
That was different.
there's these ancient temples, and God and the Bible wasn't the only one to have these temples. There's other religions, other beliefs that would create these temples. And in ancient history, they create these giant buildings, and essentially you'd have to have a priest as a mediator. So if you read a priest in the Bible, they're pretty much a mediator between God, because God would live in that temple. And if you're a human, you just can't walk up into this temple because God's there and he's going to kick your butt.
It's
so
like being a
there-
pastor, but with a lot more responsibilities, because if you let someone go in there and they don't come out, well, you know.
Sure, I don't think of myself as a priest, but that's okay. So there'd be these priests that would be mediators because you couldn't be in the presence of God. They'd have to have a special role to be in between. And then they'd also have statues in the middle of the temple, and these statues were kind of known as the image of God, which maybe sounds familiar to you guys, that phrase, the image of God. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
so how is the garden God's temple, I guess?
Even showing even more how the garden was like a temple was that in like Luke was saying, in the ancient temples they would have these idols or images that be like smack dab in the middle of the temple, like where the Holy of Holies would be, you know? But for us, we were made in God's image to be God's image. We were living images. And so that was representing that we were supposed to have dominion over God's creation. Not saying that we...
What the heck does dominion mean?
Dominion? That means
Yeah,
like,
what is
if you read in the verses, opposed to our laziness idea of Eden, God was actually there showing them how to harvest the land and how to work and how to be productive with their lives. And so showing them how to have dominion meant they were shown how to make the earth the best that can be for themselves. You know, using the animals to help them. You know, harvesting the land, different stuff like that.
Should I tell them about Subway?
Maybe you can. Yeah, I don't remember you actually coming up with that analogy, but I'm interested. So
Is there a question first?
yes, Justin.
Garden of what? Okay.
Okay, so with me, I mean, I agree with the whole lazy thing. That's great. I love that. But like to me, it's like super important to say that like they say garden, it's not like a bunch of trees in like straight rows or anything like that. It's like this crazy forest slash rainforest that's just amazing and has a bunch of animals in it. And that's really important.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like a vineyard or anything like that. It was just land upon land, and
Yeah, and And that word image of God is a ruling type of image. So the reason I was talking about Subway is this is not the best analogy, but imagine, okay, God is the CEO of Subway. He's over it all. He created Subway, okay? It doesn't have to be Subway. It could be Chick-fil-A if you like Chick-fil-A better. Do you want me to turn into a Chick-fil-A
Chipotle,
analogy?
maybe?
Chipotle. All right,
Maybe
Chipotle.
Chipotle.
Chipotle is fine. So, God created Chipotle.
You can be both, all right?
It doesn't matter.
The restaurant is not what's important in this analogy, all right?
So he makes Chipotle. He owns all, he's the top dog. And he gives us our own Chipotle. And he says, hey, I want you, Austin, you're going to manage this Chipotle. Okay? Oh my gosh. That's not important,
Chipotle.
okay? Should have stuck to Subway. So you're going to rule over this Chipotle. Ultimately, I'm ruling over all Chipotles. I'm going to give you this Chipotle to manage, to get things in line, to buy the food, to hire people, all those different things. But also, I'm the CEO. I'm going to tell you what the company is about. I'm going to tell you what our laws are. I'm going to tell you what our mottos and logos and all those things are. And you're going to have to live under my rules because I'm the CEO. If you don't like my rules, then...
And I mean, that sounds
out.
fair, right? You created the company. You own all of it. I'm just under you, right? I'm just your employee. But this is where things start to get a little dicey, all right?
It's a little
This
dicey.
is where things start to heat up
Things
a little
get
bit,
dicey
all right?
at
Things
Chipotle.
get dicey at Chipotle. Let's say you start thinking like, oh man,
Exactly what
I hate that rule where you have to wash your hands every time you want to make a burrito. Like, you know how many times I wash my hands in a day because of that one rule? Like, I'm not sure if I really like that. I think I know better than that. I want to say like maybe just every 5 times you make a burrito, you wash your hands, right?
That's
It's
kinda
possibly, but
All
that's
right,
not actually what happened. But
It's getting more disturbing as you talk about Chipotle and breaking the rules. I don't want to think about that. Let's.
But getting back to the Garden of Eden, all
Okay.
right? Getting back to God giving us dominion over the garden, okay? Us being humans, not being God ourselves, but only being images of God, we don't decide what's right and wrong. God decided from the beginning, when he was even creating things, what was good and what was, vice versa, evil. So he was creating and he was saying, this is good, this is good, this is good. And so God should be the only one who, and is the only one that has the wisdom to actually make those decisions of what is good and evil.
Not for long.
But here comes the twist in the story that we all know
All
very
right,
well.
I think we all know it, but let's just read it anyways.
yeah.
How about?
So
If you go to chapter 2, verse 16, we'll just read 2 verses there. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Sounds pretty intense there.
yeah, and so there's some misconceptions about this as well. Me going back to again when I was a kid, thinking about this, hearing this story, I was like, man, that's a really intense fruit. Like you take that, you eat it, and you literally drop dead, right? Like that's crazy. Or even more so, like you take that fruit, you eat it, and all of a sudden your eyes are open and you can see everything that's going on around you, and then all of a sudden you know everything about everything.
You're
and you know,
Superman.
yeah, you just know like good and
Superpowers.
evil, and you know everything, and it's crazy. That's not exactly what they're talking about here, is it?
Yeah, and they're also not talking about, it's not just the simple moral test. When I thought about it as a kid growing up, I was like, oh, it's pretty much just God telling him, don't take a cookie from the cookie jar. There's just this one rule, and this one rule is essentially just there just to test you guys. It's not that big of a rule, or at least it didn't seem like to me at the time. It's like, what's the big deal? They eat a stupid fruit. Why does it matter? And isn't knowledge of good and evil good? Isn't that a good thing to know?
You would want to know what is good and evil, right? But the thing that was actually happening here is by taking that fruit, if they choose to do so, they're then wanting to become God to define what is good and evil for themselves. Before, God was just able to tell them what was good and evil. So they had the knowledge of what was good and evil. But what they're really trying to say here is by taking that fruit, they're trying to then decide for themselves what's right and wrong for themselves.
Yeah, real quick, let's stop. I'm curious, what have you guys heard of give me a definition of sin. Just real quick. Doesn't have to be super theological. Just, yeah. Think, say, makes him sad.
CF for the win.
Was that another one? Was that yours? Yeah, and I don't think that's wrong, but it does bring an interesting twist when we take that from just looking at it as breaking a law or breaking a moral code, and instead, as Sam said, we're defining good and evil for ourselves. And as we kind of talked about this, I was saying it kind of brought this analogy about, it's not probably a perfect analogy, but parenting. And if I go to my dad and my dad says, hey, no cookies, don't take one from the cookie jar, and I do it, what is he going to do? He's probably going to be a little bit mad, maybe a little bit disciplined, but it's not that big of a deal. I broke one of his rules. But if I said to him, after he told me don't take a cookie from the cookie jar, and I said, hey, Dad, actually, you know what? I don't really like you. I'm gonna make my own rules. You can't tell me what to do. I can eat a cookie whenever the heck I want. You're not the boss here. I'm now the boss, and I'm gonna control what the rules are in this house. And I think that's more of what's going on here, rather than just breaking this moral test, as you said. They're trying to literally become the parent. They're trying to become God.
And so if I was your dad, which I wouldn't be, because that's not actually possible. But
it's kind of creepy.
If I was your dad, I'd be like, get out. Like, if you want to be an adult, you want to say you get to decide what's right and wrong, then go ahead and do that for yourself. And so that's actually what happens here. Is you might think it's extreme, but when they ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God banished them from the garden. And you might think that's harsh. You might think like, well, they just ate an apple. Or,
they just ate a cookie.
Yeah, they just ate a cookie. It's just one cookie, right? How bad can that be? But when you think of those implications and those ramifications that happen from that, them literally being like, God, you're not God anymore, I'm God. It's like, when you think of it that way,
it's a little bit bigger.
I don't think it's an overreaction at all for kicking them out.
Yeah. So real quick, we want to give you guys a little bit of time for small groups, so let's try to get through this last part real quickly. So you guys, we won't go over the story of the fall. I think we know it, but it's interesting. As we studied this, we came across this term, the Bible Project. Instead of calling it the fall, because the fall is just kind of a name we've come up with in the Bible, they called it the Great Split. And it's this idea of, when we ate of the fruit, there was death. But what do we think of when we think of death as Americans nowadays? It's the end of your life, right? You're done. It's the end of your life. But in the Bible, it represents a lot more than that. When they ate of the apple, did they immediately die? No. But there is also death relationally with each other. We can see that hiding and blaming each other. Then there's relational death with God. And we start becoming afraid and hiding from God as Adam did. And so death isn't just this, this thing you die and you're done. It's
not a physical death we're talking about.
Evil. There's this breakdown of relationships between us, people, and God. And it's this great split because, as we said in the beginning, heaven and earth, they were one. Are we going with fists or are we going with circle? Okay. And now, as we come to the fall, or the great split, that idea that heaven is where God lives in his presence, which was with earth, is now separate. We're removed from the garden. We're kicked out. We're no longer heaven and earth together. We're heaven
and earth.
And earth, yeah. So that leads us down. Who's read the first 10 chapters of Genesis? What happens after the fall? Lots of bad stuff. Lots of chaos. Name something.
Yeah,
Son kills the other
Cain
son.
kills Abel.
What else? The flood. Yeah, at some point
Yeah,
he
so
it
bad.
says even like he regrets. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at the earth. These people are so screwed up. I can't believe this. It's just like he's just so sad about it.
Yeah, and so
Something that's really important. My mom says that this is the only biggest thing that happened is that
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 weed?
we became a thing? Or weeds?
I thought you said weed. I'm like, what? What? So essentially, from this fall, we have a downward spiral of murder to bigger amounts of murder to God seeing evil all over the entire world, just infested. Our earth just becomes this terrible, messed up place until we get to Genesis 11. You guys we already showed you the picture, but I'll show
so
you
there,
again.
here you go again. If you want to look, it'll be
so
up there.
we were-
There it
we
is.
were-
Boom.
We were gonna read it, but since we're short on time, why don't you just recap what is going on
So-
with this tower? Does everyone know the story of the Tower of Babel? Okay, if you don't, go read Genesis 11 after this.
All right, so pretty much what happens here, we think God thinks that the people learned their lesson, right? And they're just like, oh, they're just trying to form society again. They're trying to be, productive with themselves again, right? But really, the people are just like, I bet if we build a tower high enough, we will reach the heavens, all right? Now, when they're talking about the heavens here, they could be talking about the skies, but really what they're trying to say is they're trying to build their way up.
It could be
To-
both.
it could be both,
once
yeah.
I mean, if
I
you
mean,
guys
when you
ever,
get you get
who's
high
ever
enough.
been in like a really tall building? You look down, you kind of feel powerful.
Yeah, it's
You're like,
true.
look at those tiny people. I'm so much powerful and bigger than they are. Look at them, they're like that big.
And so, but really, what their intentions here were to try to take back authority for themselves by reaching as high as possible as they really could to show God who's boss by being up there with him. Now, God obviously knew this wasn't going to happen, but he really didn't like how they're just like seriously, like again, like I just destroyed all of you, you're back now, and you're still trying to take my job, right? And so God then confuses all their languages and is like, try to do this now. And so then we see that this city was called Babylon, but we just take it as Babel. But Babylon, if you go through more of the Bible, it shows just the arrogance of humanity, where Babylon is often used to describe the most wicked and just prideful people.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talked about it, the creation story and the great split or the fall kind of represents us individually defining good and evil, whereas this spiral ultimately comes down to Babylon, and it's like, this is what it looks like when an entire people group start defining good and evil for themselves and try to take over God's spot.
And so, yeah.
It doesn't go well.
Yeah, and it's even more interesting that when they're talking about Babylon, they're not always talking about the Babylonian Empire. Later, they even talk about how Babylon is described as all the nations at the end times who are against God, described as Babylon. And so that's just the big.
It's a picture.
Yeah,
it's a imagery of evil.
yeah, it's the imagery of evil here, where Babylon is used to describe, like, if you want to try to rule for yourself and decide what's good and evil as a society, you would describe that as Babylon.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna end there for tonight. We had a little bit more. That's fine. We can end. We're gonna talk a little bit next week, kind of like what is God's response to that, and how does that play into this fact that now God's presence, or AKA heaven, is different than earth, and what is he going to do about that? I mean, I think we already know some of that, but what is his plan? Is his plan really just to like take us to earth when we die, or take us to heaven when we die, or is there something more? So go ahead into your small groups. If you have questions, you can drop them in the question box.
And then,
I apologize
small
for lack
group-
of time. We'll try to do a little bit better.
Yeah. And then small group leaders, we will have questions for you
Yeah,
to
there's
discuss in your
questions.
small groups.
But yeah, please drop your questions. I know some of you, maybe that was weird. Some of you, it's like, yeah, I already knew that, and it's not a big deal. So hopefully next week will be even crazier. I don't know. Crazy.